how to prevent a heart attack, boom, those two things, hugely. 95% of heart attacks go away.
Today, we're joined by Barton Scott, biochemist, nutritionist, and founder of Upgraded Formulas. After struggling with his own severe brain fog and fatigue, he discovered that mineral deficiency was at the root. Now, he's on a mission to help people restore their energy, focus, and long-term health.
People that pee 10 plus times a day, just adding in potassium into your diet with foods or with a supplement means that you retain the water better and you don't pee so much. I remember like having a cup of mint tea and then I'd be in the bathroom and I seemed to pee twice as much as I was drunk. Within 48 hours, this polyuria resolved just from adding potassium in.
Minerals unlock everything. When we eat fats, protein, carbs, all of these things are just a complex combination of elements. And so elements or minerals end up playing offense and defense, which is incredible. My mother started to get sick. Her health was getting worse and worse. Aneurysm. That was totally reversible, by the way, especially knowing what we have today, that would be a preventable death. Everyone thinks cramps are caused by not enough potassium. And I'm here to say that that is part of it, but the biggest driver is going to be.
So first of all, welcome to the show, Barton.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
First of all, before we jump in, why do you do what you do?
I love the question, and it's driven me to, so many different ways. Two main things come to mind is that I, at an early age, because of sports like wrestling, I understood that what we absorbed and what we ate, initially I thought it was what we ate, became the basis of how much energy we would have for the day, or I would have in a match or a tournament. And then I started to understand, wow, my brain really works so much better. And in the early 90s, this was a maybe taboo thing to say, depending on what part of the world you're in. And people, you get some sort of snide remark, right? Like, oh, what do you mean? Like, suck it up. Like, yeah. And you're like, no, I really didn't feel good eating that banana or whatever right before. And so that there was a natural interest there, and there was a drive to, well, if you're going to win at this sport, especially one where you're making weight and having to weigh in and compete, and you're taking in a very small amount of nutrients and yet having to perform at the highest level you can possibly perform, and the results are you get your ass kicked in front of everyone if you don't do well. There's a lot of motivation there, but then it went from more, there's such a deeper reason, because that I jokingly call that self-induced hypothyroidism, which is really kind of the result of wrestling for years. And so I wanted another challenge as I finished that, and I had become one of the top in the nation in my weight, but I was pretty burned out and I felt like I checked that box. And so I wanted another challenge, and I heard that chemical engineering was one of the hardest, if not the hardest things you could study. And so I went for that. I felt like chemistry was interesting, and I didn't really know why I was studying it beyond that, except I knew for wrestling there was value in doing hard things. The more discipline you had, the easier life was. And then my mother started to get sick, and I was already very interested in nutrition, reading a lot of nutrition, learning, experimenting on myself literally since 8, and then realizing pretty quickly that supplements were not absorbing. And her health was getting worse and worse, and I was getting more and more brain fogged, and school was getting harder and harder for everyone. You meet the smartest people in the world and you see them fall out around you because the workload's so demanding. And so all of that led me eventually to where we are today. Yeah.
So your background is chemical engineering.
Yeah. As well as nutrition, and then a lot of psychology. Just always been interested on what's beneath that, and we share that. So
amazing.
Yeah.
So you realize it's like you weren't absorbing what you should be absorbing. And how did you arrive at minerals specifically?
It's a great question, and it's sort of like thinking about nutrition from a surgeon's lens. If let's say I invented a surgery technique that hadn't been done before, it would seem like a miracle to people that haven't had the baseline in surgery. But with chemical engineering, you're getting a lot of years of the highest math, physics, and chemistry, and then combining that into one thing where you actually do things like build structures that produce outcomes. And usually those people go to work for big oil companies or something, and or pharmaceuticals. And I obviously didn't want to do any of that. And I thought, wow, this nanotechnology field that's emerging amongst this is incredibly interesting. They're talking about the feasibility of building a carbon nanotube that could go all the way to the moon, and the physics calculations show it's possible. And so if that's possible, I imagine we could get these supplements to absorb better. And so it was through sheer luck that my girlfriend at the time had a friend, and her friend unfortunately had cancer, and she had been on search for years, and she was only in her 20s. And she found hair analysis testing. And this became the basis of, well, how do we know it's not absorbing? And wait a minute, I've been taking this thing for a year and a half and I'm still deficient in it. How is that? I'm taking it 6 days a week. I'm taking more than the RDA. I shouldn't be chronically deficient in it, right? And so immediately that was like, I only had to see that once because of the training. And then I realized, okay, maybe it's a different brand. Surely it's a different brand. And in my mind, I kind of know, like, it's probably not a different brand. It's probably an absorption mechanism, because all these products are pretty similar. I already had a good feel for good brands. So it wasn't quality so much as effectiveness. Quality today in 2025, I hope for most brands, I mean, there's still plenty of junk out there, as we know. But there's more and more brands that have quality. That still doesn't mean absorption.
Well, something that for me, I've always chronically dehydrated. I've always battled dehydration. For instance, I have one sauna session and I have to have a double helping of minerals, electrolytes to not have a migraine and be in bed. I mean, it feels like I'm close to the edge on it always. So, and also we know from people with bone density analysis, if they have osteopenia, osteoporosis, how the body mobilizes minerals from the bones to help the system support, and bone density shows that from my mum, for instance.
Which my mother too she was diagnosed with both of those. They couldn't, which means they couldn't really figure it out. They just knew something was very wrong. Yeah.
So it's really really interesting area that, people can be supplementing with these minerals and not necessarily utilizing them properly. However, they do work to some extent, but not fully. And I think one of the things that I've come to understand from supplementing with minerals, forget all the fancy stuff for a minute, is if you're eating a whole food diet, I mean, the minerals in whole foods, okay, the volumes are a lot lower these days, significantly lower, because crops haven't been rotated. So therefore the soil hasn't got the minerals in it in the first place, and therefore the food's deficient in it. And then your absorption rate from your gut, and because of antibiotics and things like that, is lower. So therefore you end up deficient. So you can't bombard your gut with, 50 stems of broccoli a day to get magnesium, right?
You're right.
But the magnesium within natural foods is different to, when you get them from a supplement in the first place. And obviously they're smaller particles or whatnot in the first place. So this brings me on to, kind of the next step from what we're discussing. So you mentioned nano a few times. Now we know nanoparticles are significantly smaller.
I believe I was the first one that I know of to use that word in supplements. Certainly in minerals. And to go back to your previous question about the periodic table, I realized that the question to ask was, someone in her 60s, like my mother then, before she passed, she had an aneurysm that was totally reversible, by the way. Especially knowing, like, I'm completely certain, knowing what we have today and having the process that we have today, not just the products, that would be a preventable death. And she would, my dad's still well in 81, very healthy and energized, not overweight, moves around well. She'd probably be right there with him. And yet doctors were saying, take more calcium, take more vitamin D, which vitamin D, if, raises calcium levels. And if you already have a magnesium deficiency, it's like a balance beam, and one is pushing out the other. So the calcium is pushing out the magnesium. And it's already high. And really, the nasty part is a really high calcium level causes something called a calcium shell, and that keeps nutrients from getting into the cell. So why the periodic table? I realized in that search for what would work for both of us and therefore for everyone, because I felt like the deep reason in self-inquiry why I'm here is specifically to reduce suffering for people through means that I already understand.
So why are minerals so important for health?
So minerals unlock everything. I realized that when we eat fats, protein, carbs, all of these things are just a complex combination of elements. And minerals, of course, elements. And then the minerals also produce this defense mechanism as well. So if they are activating these enzyme pathways, heavy metals can't plug into them because they're already paired off, so to speak. And so elements or minerals end up playing offense and defense, which is incredible, right?
Interesting. I mean, it's funny because our body, for me, my understanding of minerals and electrolytes, which, same thing, pretty much, trace elements, is we're electrical humans. And people seem to forget that unless you're on, having resus, that we're electrical. And, sunlight hits our skin, sulfates, cholesterol into hormones, and electrolytes or minerals help our wiring the veins with water, helping them to move around.
Nerve impulses, all of it.
Exactly. So that nervous system is electrical. And yet people seem to think that they don't necessarily need more minerals. We're an electrical creature. And yet these things, like for instance, if you look at copper, the most conductive element of all, and people are deficient in it. Yeah. And then they wonder why they get chronic fatigue. It's like one of the things that another one of the things I learned is actually from one of your supplements, which is the nano manganese. It's like, I noticed, so for instance, I had typically low thyroid, and I tried supplementing with thyroid hormones, and yeah, sure, it helped a little bit. And it wasn't until I actually had manganese that I realized that, and anyone that I give manganese to that has cold hands and feet. So anyone watching this that's got cold hands and feet, and you're like, oh yeah, I've always got cold hands and feet, and I used to use a blanket oil. When you add in manganese, and it's a good one, your body temperature picks up because it helps activate your thyroid hormones. Yeah, and there's like funny people that have viral issues when they start supplementing with a decent zinc, they stop getting viruses. It's almost like, this helps unlock an area of our metabolism to work correctly.
And the core body temperature, as it raises, just destroys so many viruses that would otherwise exist, and we would be a host for. And yeah, that SOD pathway, for the thyroid with manganese is, you were one of the first people that I heard of, at least, that figured that out by using our supplements. And so that was an incredible unlock. I think this has been years ago now. It's probably like 4 years ago or so, but I think for your mom as well.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, totally. I mean, I'll come on to the magnesium in a little while, and why magnesium is so fantastic. And basically, you burn up to 30% less fat when you're dehydrated.
Whoa.
So yeah, when you're dehydrated, your metabolism slows down due to the liver having to assist the kidneys, which can't function as efficiently without enough water and minerals. As a result, the liver's fat burning capability is diminished. And I've got linked to a study here, which we put in the show notes. So it's basically, it's the metabolic connection from minerals. Being as little as 2% dehydrated can impact various metabolic functions, including lipolysis, fat breakdown. This happens because dehydration interferes with the production of key hormones like growth hormone, HGH, which is crucial for fat metabolism. So, and when you're 5% dehydrated, you have 30% less cognition. Yet most people walk around like that without realizing it. And, it's funny because, I've used a lot of nootropics, and I've always in the assumption that if my body's not well, I shouldn't really optimize my body first. I should make sure my brain is optimized, because without my brain, I can't optimize my body. And so I've taken loads of nootropics, you know, just about every smart drug you can possibly ever think of. And the ones that move the needle the most are the water and minerals. So it's actually quite funny how, you know, that gives you a 30% boost in cognition from 30% just by 5% dehydration. And in fact, I got a chart, which maybe we're sharing the show notes, that shows what happens when you're dehydrated, you know, as much all the way up to 5 to 10%, and how it puts such a strain on the body. You know, I think before I move on to the next question, I mean, there's one thing that actually Gary Brecker said recently, I saw him say, and he said, there's no pain receptors in the brain, and yet we all get headaches from time to time. I was like, well, what is that? Well, actually, that's the fascia and everything around the head tightening up. And what's the thing that helps relax this?
Magnesium.
Yes. And sodium. Yeah, sodium or magnesium. And so if you're getting a headache, for instance, especially after sauna or exercising and things like that, that's everything tightening up because you're dehydrated.
Yeah, it's actually, like, to really call it out, it's magnesium, sodium, potassium, I would say, because the one is helping water in the cell, one is helping send the nerve impulse, and one is perpetuating that impulse, right? So the impulse continues easily. And yeah, it's a magnificent orchestra that we totally take for granted.
Yeah. And it's quite funny because if I start getting a headache, I mean, to be honest, now I have 3 sachets of electrolytes when I'm on the move, a day, and I don't get headaches anymore. You know, and inflammation based. There is an exception to that. So if I've had an aged steak and I haven't had any natural antihistamine, a DAO enzyme, because histamine also gives me headaches. Yeah. But again, that you could argue that is down to dehydration in some form as well.
Depending on particular genetics, that'll be more of a problem or less of a problem for a particular person, of course, right? And then there's also this aspect of when you look purely at magnesium, even, and inflammation, you know, when the body loses magnesium, there's a really crazy phenomenon that I don't think we fully understand yet, but it's sort of a network effect. So you lose magnesium, then you shed other electrolytes, and then inflammation happens, actually cell death happens as a result. And then inflammation comes in to clean up a mess. And that's okay if it happens here and there, but if it's acute, then the body's in inflammation all the time. And how do you reverse it? Well, that keystone mineral and cofactors like B6.
Yeah, it's also tied into that, which is also electrical, is grounding. Because we know that when the body's in an inflamed state, grounding of barefoot, for instance, and this isn't woo-woo, there's 26 studies, including peer-reviewed studies, showing how grounding is so efficient at reducing inflammation, improving circulation, blood cell formation, and making sure that the red blood cells are equidistant and stuff. And it again ties into the whole electrical thing. But if you're deficient in copper, or the electrolytes, basically, grounding will be less efficient as well, and therefore your sleep will be worse. And so it's crazy how this all ties into a stress state.
It is, and it's what you said is something I think about when people ask me about red light and other different biohacking modalities, which, look, I love and use all, if not extreme number of these things. And also, if the body can't really hold a charge based on its electrical potential being lower than it should be, all of these things don't have the effect that they could.
I mean, for someone listening now, actually, I'm going to take it back a little step. On Instagram last week, there was an influencer sharing out a bottle of water, tap water or whatever. And she said, you don't need all these electrolyte supplements unless you're a pro sports athlete, unless you're doing X, Y, and Z. And I was like, you do not know what you're talking about. Like, you are, it's dangerous.
That's dangerous information.
So for one of these people walking around with a 3-liter bottle of water everywhere they go and drawing out the top, and they say, I hydrate enough.
That was me at 18, you know, and I probably caused all my mineral deficiencies as a result.
Yes, it's crazy. I mean, and I'd love your take on this. So the way I see it is that with anything, okay, let's take it to a pregnant mum, for instance, for a second. Why does she crave ice cream and pickles?
Deficiencies.
Exactly right.
Period.
And we crave those things that we need, right?
Yeah.
We crave those things that we need. So if we're deficient in minerals,
So she's craving calcium and potassium most likely.
so okay, so we're craving. We say, oh, we need a drink of water. Okay, so we're craving more minerals. So we drink water that's low in minerals, put more water in, which means our kidneys obviously have to flush it out, which means you pee more, and you keep on drinking because, I can't seem to stop being thirsty. It's because we're not actually just craving the water, we're craving the minerals in the water. So if you're just drinking tap water or mineral water from a bottle somewhere or other, you're actually craving more minerals, but drink. So it's really interesting when people say to me, oh, I drink enough water, unhydrated. Now, what would you say to them?
I would say, how do you know? And that leads us to that, a phrase that we trademark, which is test, don't guess. And why I love hair testing. And I've developed so much understanding for myself and so many people using that. And I've become one of the people that's an expert in that in the world today, that teaches it, put a course out for practitioners years ago. And because I thought there's not enough people that teach this. And for whatever reason, there's been some people that don't know half of what I know, and yet they think they're qualified to talk about it negatively. When someone can sit in front of me, or say one of our nutritionists, anyone that's really well trained in this test, and you would think that I was a mind reader, because I can go, oh, you're not remembering. I mean, I'll tell you a story way back to my first hair analysis, years and years and years ago. And the guy, since retired now, was a great mentor. And he said, he had this booming South African accent. And he said, Barton, you're not remembering your dreams, are you, mate? And I said, how, like in my head, I'm like, how the hell does he know this? And also like, wow, that's fascinating. And also, sure. Yeah, I was 25, 24, something like that at the time. And I remember thinking, wow, I want to learn all of this. And this test really is a test of the elements and their ratios. So it's not enough to just see, oh, look, I'm a bit low in this one, selenium, copper, manganese, magnesium, etc. But what are the most important ratios that drive the body? What are the dominoes? And when you look at those dominoes and you get those dominoes improved, so to speak, the whole body syncs up and works better.
Okay,
and that affects hormones, by the way. I will say, just shout out to all the hormone doctors out there that want to have better results. Exactly what we're talking about. May even prevent the need for biologically adapted hormones. And so, yeah, that's really a last stage. I look at it as a waterfall effect. So if you've ever been on a hike, you look up at the waterfall. I was out in Maui a couple of years ago. I was explaining this concept to a friend of mine, Natalie, who, huge following online, has been taking supplements for a long time. She was actually the woman behind, Jillian Michaels, doing all the exercises. Incredibly fit, very knowledgeable, and yet very spacey, because she was getting 15 minutes of deep sleep on average per night. And she's since become a friend. Within 5 nights, we took her to 2 hours of sleep with upgraded magnesium product. But that's not the point here. The point is actually, although that's incredible and totally life-changing, and she went on a 30-day experiment, by the way, of doing 30 new things, one thing every day for a month. In other words, like, all right, I've never been surfing, man, surf, like, because she had all this energy, creativity, bandwidth, capacity. And I said, you see the top of that waterfall. Now, remember, we're in Maui, we're hiking up, it's a few of us. And I go, when you get your minerals right, you get enough, you get the right ratios, you start to push out more and more heavy metals. It takes care, because she was asking about hormones, it takes care of hormones, which I would say are midway down that pathway. Because again, what are hormones made of? Complex combination of elements, fats, sure. Amino acids, sure. And what else? Elements. But also, what are fats made of? Elements. Or amino acids, elements.
I mean, I want to touch on the testing side of things quickly, because you mentioned testing, and I think part of the reason why we know each other was because I saw you on a podcast, a friend of ours, mutual friend, which was Tara Garrison's podcast many years ago now. It was in like 2018, 19.
Love Tara, shout out.
And my background of health issues turned out that I was mercury poisoned. And, doctors didn't know any of this stuff. And I actually had a hair mineral analysis test done. And my research back in like 2013 was on Andy Cutler's work and he was obviously, I think he was biochem as well, actually. And he talked about hair mineral analysis and looking at your deficiencies or what your hair was excreting, and then looking at the amount of deficiencies you had. So I would say I'm very, very well read in the subject, in, you know, scientific textbook level stuff, not just, you know, ChatGPT crap.
Sure.
And one of the things that struck me was that I was mercury toxic. However, on the test, it showed that my mercury levels were okay. But with Andy Cutler, and this is something we'll touch on with your test in a minute, which is fantastic, is showed that I had so many deficiencies and so many surpluses in my hair, and mercury was okay, and so was arsenic, was a little bit elevated.
We'll get to that.
What Andy talks about was we should ideally have a few minor deficiencies and a few minor excesses, and most of the results should be baseline. And if you have major deficiencies of, say, 7 or 8 or more deficiencies in minerals, mercury or toxic elements actually stop you excreting, or make you hold on to, or make you excrete too much, so you'll have mineral imbalance, major mineral imbalances. And Andy Cutler calls them actually counting counting rules. And then you look at how many deficiencies or excesses. So it's really interesting for me is why actually, wow, I've got classic 2 major signs of mercury toxicity. So then I did another test, which looked at hair, blood, and urine, all 3 of them. And actually, yes, it's right. It showed that I was very high in mercury, which then I got into the mercury chelation route, and then methylation support to increase my detoxification back to where it should be. So, you know, I would say I've gone down the rabbit hole pretty extreme. And I think one thing that when I saw you on Tara's podcast, which piqued my interest, was you were talking about each of the elements, each of the minerals, and how they interfered with each other and how they supported metabolism and all of these things. And it seemed like, you know, you'd gone down the rabbit hole on a slightly different angle, but finding a very similar thing. And that's when I actually got Tara to introduce me to you, and you're like, hey, I'm going to send you one of my hair tests or whatever. And, you know, you have a look and see what your results are like. And then I realized that you got it. Whereas everyone else in the mercury detoxification space or anyone else seemed to not get it. Now, one thing I just want to ask your opinion on in here is, and I'm going to touch on the magnesium thing, because one thing I heard is that mercury competes for the cell and stops magnesium getting into the cell. So if you have high levels of mercury, and that can be from salmon, or it could be from metal fillings or whatever, then you're always going to be deficient in magnesium because you can't get it into the cell. And as we know, magnesium has up to around 400 enzymatic reactions in the body.
Oh, new update. So yeah, so 400 is a lot already. The latest research I've seen is actually over 3,700. 3,751 is what I've read the past couple of years. And whether it's 400, 300, or 3,750, it's a loss, and it's far more than almost anything. Which to me, if for one supplement for the rest of life, it would be that if I had one that I would absorb, which is the first product I put out actually for this reason, because it was the biggest leverage point. Because I've tried to do things where the biggest chess move would be that. And so if you do that, and if you give someone that ability, that leverage, they'll have a massive impact with having even very little understanding of what's happening in their body biochemically. Now, the interesting thing about mercury is it blocks receptors, because I agree with what you said. And how it happens is mercury, if it's blocking the receptors of the thyroid, which it does, you can, then the whole system can slow down, right? When the system slows down, it's a lot like throwing a log in a wood burning stove and having it burn very incompletely. And then it's excreted. And you take the log out and you have to start the fire over again and make a proper fire the next time. And so that lowered metabolic rate means that certain elements the sequence and the ignition doesn't happen the way it should.
Yeah, it's quite crazy, isn't it? I think, like for the magnesium thing,
it's the elemental dance.
Yeah, I mean, it's the funny thing. So, for instance, people that have high mercury levels, often have low HRV, heart rate variability, which is one of the biggest actually predictors of overall health that there is. And
I hadn't heard that correlation, but I love that. And it's not surprising. It actually fits with the thyroid analysis.
also with the heart itself, because the potassium makes muscles contract, and magnesium helps them relax. So, which is the heart, the dance, you know.
Side note, like how to prevent a heart attack, boom, those two things hugely. 95% of heart attacks go away if that was balanced.
And what happens when you're in the hospital? What do? They give you Magnesium, yeah. And so I think people with high mercury often have low HRV because they're not utilizing magnesium properly, and often the potassium is also deficient as well for obvious reasons. Yeah, one of the key indicators actually for me and for many people along the way over the last however many years is that people that pee 10 plus times a day, just adding in potassium into your diet with foods or with a supplement means that you retain the water better and you don't pee so much.
I love that. And that's a really cool take. The other bladder angle that I talk to people about is imagine your bladder's the size of a coffee cup, and because that's why you're peeing 10 times a day, probably. Now, with magnesium, the relaxation we're talking about with muscles, which the bladder is, fascia and muscles right around it, and then it expands to its normal size, and then suddenly that person only goes, four times a day or something, as they should. And so it's that relaxation response there that allows for that.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember that
amazing.
2015, I remember like probably at the peak of health issues. And I remember like having a cup of mint tea, and then I'd be in the bathroom and I seemed to pee twice as much as I was drunk. And it's like, no, I always pee loads. It's like I was drinking more water, but not mineralized. And then as soon as I realized that, and I tested actually each mineral one by one to see, and it was on the 6th or 7th, I hit potassium, and then that's when I stopped peeing. If within 48 hours, this polyuria that the doctors had given me 24-hour urine test challenges and all this stuff resolved just from adding potassium in.
Yeah, kidney function and potassium is key too. Yeah,
it's insane how simple it is, and yet no practitioner, no doctor, no one knew anything like that. And so it's bonkers how like something as simple as magnesium and potassium and sodium can help the body in so many ways. And so when I saw that influencer the other day saying, "Oh my God, I need these things," I just like, do you realize you have no idea? And I'm just
kill people. I'd say it's that advice for a decade. Yeah,
exactly. And it's like I'm sitting here with the biochem dude across the table talking about this stuff and actually why it is so fundamentally important.
So it's changed my life.
Even if you eat properly, you can still be mineral deficient because our soil is depleted and water is stripped of minerals because of processing. Now, what minerals are people most deficient in the most?
God, well, the ones that have so much leverage, or some of the ones we're talking about, but iodine is one we haven't talked about, and that's a huge one. There was a study done, 6,000 people, 96% of 6,000 were deficient, and some of which were to have been taking iodine regularly, prior to the collection. And so the other part of this is really fascinating to me, and this hints at why a great diet, eating well, beyond the soil issue and just the lower level of nutrients, causes it's just not specific enough to reverse a deficiency. So obviously we have to eat some things, but here's something to be aware of, right? And this is why I love precise nutrition, and I realize the importance of absorption and testing regularly. So almonds, right? If you go and you find, oh, well, look, and you're trying to do it yourself, for example, a common trap that someone would fall into would be they would look at foods high in magnesium, and one of those foods would be, say, almonds. And when they do, they'll find that almonds are 6 times higher in calcium than they are in magnesium, but they won't find that out ever, probably. They'll just see that it's listed as a high magnesium food, and they'll eat a bunch of it. Now, if you're like 90% or more of people that we've tested, they are higher in calcium than they are in magnesium, meaning they need less calcium, even if they're not actively consuming calcium. It just, it's so easy to get calcium in the diet comparatively. And they, as I said earlier, they're on a seesaw, a counterbalance between the two of each other. And calcium is the heavier one, right? And so it's pushing magnesium out. And magnesium is just being used for everything, nervous system. If you're stressed, so many different things, ATP, and about 3,700 other things in the body. And so, yeah, it's just, when you think of that lack of specificity, you'd wonder how any of us, I mean, the body is just a wondrous thing that it keeps going at the rate it does.
So most people are deficient in iodine. In fact, it's quite funny because when you look at thyroid hormones themselves and you see how iodines are attached, I think it's 3 iodine to 1 thyroid hormone, and so 3 iodine for T3, T4, 4, and whatnot. And that's how the thyroid hormones are made up. And the thyroid hormones are like the messengers for sending hormones around the body to tell it to do stuff.
Yeah. And then we have magnesium that's directing that TSH signal that's important. And then we've got selenium that's helping activate, inactive to active, and, zinc's playing its role. It's a whole, orchestra.
Yeah. And the fact, so like, I mean, if you think about nutrition, we just can take it back for a second. If we look at nutrition as a whole, right, we go, what do we need? We need protein, fats, carbohydrates, minerals. Right, these are the main groups, right? And yet people are saying, oh, eat enough protein, or you've got to have good fats, or have some carbs for obvious reasons. But they don't necessarily go have some electrolytes or minerals. You should get it from your food. And then it takes me back to this influencer that thinks she understands the level of stuff that you do, saying you don't need them unless X, Y, and Z. I think everyone should actually have these in their diet in some form. And this is why some of the major brands out there are doing so well. I mean, let's be honest, when it's just salt in a packet, and it's not necessarily targeted for what you need, the margin is ridiculous. And, they're huge brands, but they're not necessarily, it's a sweeping statement.
Yeah, it's not getting the micro minerals in there, like unlike a trace minerals product that either we have or some other company has. But again, it's absorption. And trace minerals doesn't necessarily mean small enough to be absorbed.
Exactly. And I think this is the one thing that the word supplement, by definition, is to supplement. So, and I think, so for instance, to go to your point about magnesium, if you're deficient in magnesium, but you have almonds and it's got lots of calcium, well, it's not necessarily right. You need something to go in there and clear up the mess, and which is the magnesium. And my opinion is that most people are deficient in magnesium.
100%. Potassium as well. 99% of people are deficient in potassium.
Yeah.
And so we could go on and on. I mean, the over 60% population's deficient in most of the minerals they need, I would say.
And yet if most heart palpitations, heart palpitations or whatever, they get put on
using potassium.
No,
basically statin.
Yes, no, the doctors will put you on a beta blocker.
Sure.
Yeah, and they go, oh, how can we master this? Instead of how can we just give this person the right minerals?
Right. That brings up a really interesting question that I'd love anyone to ask themselves, and that is, let's say someone is 50 years old and at 47 they had no issues. They had no issues that they knew of that were causing problems, and now at 50 they're having all these problems. What changed? So I always think, if you're having issues now, what changed? And the answer really is you became deficient in something, probably because of a life traumatic event. Maybe it was a car wreck, maybe it was a relationship, maybe it was a business, maybe it was a lot of good things just all at once. And, the nutrient supply didn't keep up with the output.
One of the things from me being a biohacker is I learn from the best that I can find. I don't care generally about qualifications. It's more about personal experience. But when you get an overlap of personal experience and qualifications where someone really knows their shit, I really listen. And I like to learn from the best. And when someone says to me, well, you're not medically qualified, or you're not qualified, I'm like, yeah, but I learned from this dude here.
Yeah.
And sit and interview them and figure out if I'm wrong in something or other even. And it's great.
Love that.
One of the things that
Well, there's so much indoctrination in most educational systems today. I think any logical, smart, aware person would agree with that. It's self-evident. It's a self-evident truth.
So you do this test, right? Which obviously we've mentioned about already, but also what I really love is, okay, one thing I hate, I'll start with that, is that when someone says, how can I make money? What can I do to make money? Versus someone that says, here's something missing in the world and I want this. And this is what I'm going to build. So with your test, that's one thing. The other thing is that you've formulated upgraded formulas, which are nanoparticle. I'll let you explain a little bit of that about in a minute. The nanoparticle minerals. Now, the reason I think we first started hanging out properly was obviously because of the podcast. I heard you, but when I reached out to you via Tara, actually, and I said, you know, what should I try? Because I like the sound of these minerals. You know, I'd try the magnesium. Okay. So, and this is the context, which is why we're sitting down today. And it's not about plugging a brand. It's not about selling new supplements. It really is telling you, look, how great when you get them right is. I used to go for magnesium IV twice a week because my mercury levels were high. My body couldn't deal with the magnesium properly. Magnesium sulfate IV would work for me. I'd relax. My heart rate variability would go up. My resting heart rate would come down. I would sleep better. It was amazing. And I would do this twice a week, pretty much every single week. I still love the guys in the IVL clinic and I go in for glutathione quite regularly. But what I noticed was when I got your magnesium, I didn't need IV anymore.
Yeah. Nutrition's so good, you don't need IVs. That's us.
and that's a great line. I like that. But the thing is but I had been supplementing with magnesium and it not really worked for me for the most part. It sure does it. If I have a headache in the short term, it's kind of like works, generally supplements. And, you know, as discussed, some of the hydration sachets that I carry around with me when moving around. Yours are more, I think, focused on filling deficiencies than just day-to-day tick over, to be honest, which gets you to points so you don't necessarily need the day-to-day tick over. But the magnesium for me was game-changing. And, you know, I learned to self-IV and do magnesium. And I stopped needing to do that the moment I started using your magnesium. So I knew through own evidence, it wasn't just BS of another brand trying to sell me a product.
Yeah. And when you say self-IV, you mean dosing? What dose were you using then? Do you remember?
Yeah, about 1.5 grams mixed with procaine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it's pretty nerve-wracking to your own IV. It's, you know, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone at all, ever, ever, ever. And I saw our mutual friend, Ben Greenwell, and I was like, Ben, you're crazy, dude. And there he is doing IV for himself. Yeah. But the point is you don't need to, because, you know, and I want you to discuss the mechanism or like why upgraded formulas, magnesium meant that I didn't have to IV anymore.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So one thing that I started to think about was, how does the body do it? And what I mean is, how does the body digest and absorb these elements? And I pretty quickly landed on, well, the most things are delivery failure. And so if we get that right, then things succeed. And this is true like in the world in the macro level, but certainly in a nutrient delivery system. And so that is red blood cells. So what's the size of a red blood cell? Well, it's about 10,000 nanometers or nanometers. And so I knew that the particle size of most supplements, after researching this, and you can find this with certain types of lasers, you can actually, you look and you can actually test, and we can test our batches to see, oh, are we at the right nano ratio or level? So we shoot for around 10, and I figured this out because this is how the body does it with food. The body does it by taking whatever you eat. Maybe it's steak, maybe it's salad, maybe it's magnesium, maybe it's iodine, maybe it's selenium, and it breaks it down to a particle size small enough to get into that red blood cell, quote unquote, without digestion, is what we do, right? And so if there's 100 steps in the digestive process, at step 100, it does what? It goes into the bloodstream. And so looking at that and deconstructing that and walking it backwards was the way to find this solution. And so then it's about making it stable. And so that has a long shelf life of 3 years or so, or more, really. And so that's the way. So really 3 sizes. People are watching this on video. It's like you have your red blood cell, and then you have normal supplements that, unless they're broken down, they're starting off at 50 to 80,000. So 5 to 8 times larger than that red blood cell. And then you have something that would be, smaller than the head of a pin if I was holding a pin. And so that's going in. So you have something that's 1,000 times smaller. And then that allows for this boom absorption. And then you have something called last sciencey thing I'll say is electron driving force. So how do elements behave in their natural state? Well, there's a driving force that happens. So there's a sort of, think of it as a magnetic pull into the cell.
So again, what I hear on all of that is the cell is this big, but the magnesium particle is generally that big. And what you've done is you've broken it down so it's smaller, so you can get more into the cell more easily.
Totally. And just to say something to this, because this is a huge unlearning moment or relearning moment for anyone out there, because since about 2010, we've been taught and regurgitated by, nutritionists, doctors, well-meaning people that were doing the best that they could. But that is a lot like taking, a car when you could take a jet. When you're talking, and what I'm talking about is, well, take this form of, they'll say, like, take this form of magnesium for sleep, and this form for muscles, and this form for the brain. Only this one crosses the blood-brain barrier. And my question to that is that how the body does it with food? And if it's not, and that is how we've evolved over how many years? So that is why that's the thesis on why we want to mimic what the body does.
So yeah, it's a really interesting point. I'm glad you raised that, because I was going to say one thing you said to me like a few years ago. You're like, I said, oh, which magnesium form is best? And you go, magnesium only has one form.
Yeah.
It's bonded to something or other for the body to be able to utilize it. But in nature, it's not found like that. So magnesium taurate, magnesium citrate, whatever, right? So some people say, oh, well, I have 7 types or 10 types of magnesium in my capsule, which is like, okay, well, you don't really need any. It just needs to be in the right form itself. And so
at particle size.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so for instance, with upgraded magnesium, it comes in, it's magnesium in its elemental form, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, we're starting off in an elemental form, and then we're putting it through our process to create something like a plasma, is the best way to think of it. And then that is then stable through the process, and then that is what's bottled or encapsulated. So, and then we put that in 8 hours sleep as well. And we did a clinical trial on all of this to prove it, because I knew that there would be such a teaching required to get people to understand and sort of give up what they've done for a long time. Because habits are hard to break, especially ones that you rely on that get you some amount of benefit, like taking glycinate for sleep. It's like, well, look, that's not, that is, one, it's a chemist playing around with end products in a lab versus a chemical engineer that has understanding of nanotechnology and going, we need a better system to create a better output.
So basically, what I hear on this is it bypasses digestion and basically goes pretty much straight into the bloodstream instead of having to digest it like you do when it's bonded to something like taurate or taurine.
So totally, yeah. And what's amazing in terms of proof, I mean, your IV example was proof of that. Whenever I am on a flight, I'll often have little minor foot cramps that wake me up on long, transatlantic flights. I will put a couple droppers of the upgraded magnesium liquid, or I'll take a couple of the capsules. If I'm doing the droppers, the cramp will be gone by the time I put my eye mask back on. I'm talking like 2 to 3 minutes. The cramp is gone. And this works for women with PMS. This works with people with headaches, largely, depending on the type of headache. It can really help. Obviously, it's hydration also. They need water too. They need maybe potassium also is going to help. But the biggest driver I've seen, and I've tested personally, and we've been doing this for years now. I've had the company for a decade this March. So yeah, we've seen a lot of before and afters at this point. Yeah.
And one thing that I really like is the test. So it starts with the test for me. So it's like, actually, when we talked about the brand and I'm like, dude, like more people need to know about this. It's like, it's not just, hey, we're going to sell you supplements. We're going to sell you supplements, you know, just have to take it on blind faith that they work.
Right.
It's like, get your test done, get your hair mineral analysis done, look at what your deficiencies actually are, and then buy just what you need. And then you have the rundown, a bottle of each different of the minerals. For instance, I use the zinc, and especially since I upped my testosterone levels, and I'm playing with TRT at the moment, you know, you get spots and things, and adding in the zinc gets rid of those spots. Or my sleep is screwed, more magnesium. Or if I start peeing more frequently, more potassium. So, and obviously I have these actually on the counter at home.
Also boron for sex binding globulin, reducing that sex binding globulin. We make a boron that I'm not sure if you tried at this point, but it's really nice. It's a high dose, and just like our iodine's high dose. And then we put together a total testosterone pack that the one non-mineral product that greatly enhances testosterone for people. We've seen huge results. We did a clinical trial on that one as well. That one greatly improves testosterone endothelial function, so it's going to help heart and all sorts of things.
So we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes, Barton.
Yeah.
But I just want to emphasize to the guys listening to this, number one is hydrate properly.
Yeah.
And make sure that, you know, even if you just carry around sea salt, Celtic salt, whatever, you know, it's better than just drinking plain water, and you just have to put a little pinch to get the minerals into you. Yeah. If you have deficiencies, I really recommend getting a hair mineral analysis test. It doesn't have to be one from Upgraded Formulas. You can get them around the world quite easily. But Barton does the end-to-end thing with it, and you can then supplement with the right ones for your deficiencies. And, you know, I'm not paid to say I love this brand. Like I've said this for many years. We're sitting down for the first time. I occasionally share a story about Upgraded Formulas because I use it in my day-to-day. Anyone that comes to my house sees the row of them next to the sink that goes in my hydrogen water and whatnot. And I really, you know, do use them and have used them for many years. In fact, we were talking about the trace elements the other day together, or I think the name should be different from trace elements to liquid salt, because I think that's, you know, people are really understanding better.
Yeah, thank you for helping me share this message, because I can say if I had 100 million in the bank, I would still want to do this, and that's how important I believe this.
Mission-led, baby, mission-led. Yeah. I just want to do 3 very quick-fire, rapid things before we wrap up.
Sure.
Say thank you for the day. So, what's the most underrated mineral for health?
My goodness. Wow. Manganese might be one of them, but magnesium, for years I've talked about magnesium. The world seems to be waking up to that fact. Try ours. Potassium, God, I don't know that I can pick one. Iodine is a huge one. You're like, we're all sleeping on iodine. We don't have nearly enough, and you need it every day. Yeah, that's my multi-answer.
Okay, and what's your daily personal mineral habit look like?
Wow. Dependent on my test results and my travel, and if I've just been on a plane, and so many deficiencies, but magnesium every night. I take 8 hours sleep or upgrade magnesium, and I take it during the day. We have a cramp formula that I really like because it has the active form of P5P, trace minerals, humic, fulvic, and I really like that for taking during the day as well. And so because it's needed to make energy. So if you're thinking, oh, I need another espresso, or I need another nootropic stack, and you know it's 11 a.m., 2 p.m., 5 p.m., try that or something. If you try something similar, I don't know that you can, but that would be my suggestion.
Cool. And then what is one mineral myth that you want to bust?
Oh my God. All right. So everyone thinks cramps are caused by not enough potassium. And I'm here to say that that is part of it, but the biggest driver is going to be magnesium.
Amazing. Barton, thank you for hanging out today. Good to see you, man. Glad we finally recorded together.
Yeah. This has been so fun.
You've been listening to the Health Optimization Podcast, and I'm Tim Gray. If you've enjoyed this episode, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe for more.